Hi, thanks for joining us for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. I'm Chris Cooper. Insects like to eat plants, but spiders eat insects. Today we're talking about our eight-legged friends. Also, rodents can be destructive. We'll show you how to control them. That's just ahead on the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South.
Production funding for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South is provided by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the Family Plot. I'm Chris Cooper. Joining me today is Andy Williams. Andy is the director out at Lichterman Nature Center, and Mr. D is here. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
All right.
Hello.
Andy, you have spiders, and I'll try not to scream throughout the segment. So what do we need to know about the spiders? Because they are beneficial, right?
They are, and that's the point. If you can get past your phobias about spiders.
Yeah.
I mean, next to snakes, they're some of the most misunderstood creatures on the planet. They have just really undeserved reputations. But the more you know about them, of course, you know, it's my thing anyway.
Right.
But the more you know about them, the more interesting they are. To start with, in broad strokes, they're arthropods. They're related to insects, but they're not insects. Okay. Insects typically have 3 legs, 3 body parts. But spiders are arachnids, and spiders and their relatives, and they have 8 legs, they have 2 body parts, and some other interesting equipment. Yeah. So this is not a native spider. This is actually a blonde tarantula from the Sonoran Desert. But we use it because it's the large size. Our native spiders tend to live, most of them just live a single year, but their life cycles tend to, they live between 1 to 3 years. So this time of the year, they're kind of on the small side, and so it's very helpful to have live spiders that live longer. These tarantulas can live 5, 10, 20 years, and they're very long-lived.
Wow.
They're typically females. Most spiders are sexually dimorphic. In other words, there are very distinct differences between the males and females, and the females are larger and live longer, which is kind of a lesson there. Yeah. You really can't tell really clearly here that it has 8 eyes, but the eyes are on the part called the cephalothorax, which is kind of a head chest. They have 8 legs, 8 eyes. They're more sensitive to light and dark, although jumping spiders can see up to 8 inches. They have pedipalps, a large, that looks like a first set of legs, and inside they have fangs. The fangs are connected to venom glands. All spiders are venomous.
All spiders are venomous.
However, not all spiders are venomous. Is deleterious to humans, but every time you talk about spiders, you know, you really have to talk about the brown recluse and the black widow, which are also found in the gardens, and you really don't necessarily want. The black widows are distinctive. They've got the hourglass marking and that sort of stuff. Spiders will eat anything, and so they eat the males, they eat other spiders, of course they eat everything. The brown recluse, we won't go into too much detail about it at this point, but they're small, wispy brown spiders that hang out in your closets and all like that, and you really want to avoid them. But anyhow, those are the 2 no-nos, but most of the other spiders that we have, and there are thousands of them. People tell us that you're never more than 3 feet away from a spider. Your house, your garden, everywhere. But the good news is they eat bugs, and they eat lots of bugs. Okay. In the South, we have 3 general types of spiders. We have the very familiar web spinning spiders or web weaving. All spiders have silk glands they use to not only trap their prey, but also provide habitat. They use it in a variety of interesting ways. But these orb weaving spiders will just lay in their webs and wait for something to come into it. Let's see if we can get him down a little bit. This is our native wolf spider, which they get, not terrifying, but they get very large. See if I can get that around where we can see it.
Large ones in the garden.
They get larger later, and you know they look more like our friend the tarantula. And this is so tiny you can't see it this time. This is a jumping spider that jumps around and grabs its prey. Okay. Another spider that a lot of people only find out by mistake, but are fairly common, are the crab-type spiders. The crab-type spiders have they look like little miniature crabs. Crabs are also arthropods, but they're crustaceans. So they're related, but not really the same thing. But you can see it's got its legs in a crab-like position. So anyhow, those are the three basic types of spiders. They eat and hunt differently. Like we talked about, these wait in flowers, and in the summer, some of them are beautiful. They're white, they're green, they're red, they're pink. They mimic the flowers, and they ambush and catch things in the flowers.
Wow, so they mimic the flowers.
Yeah, well, they mimic the colors of the
colors are
flowers.
the same, yeah.
And they just chill out, stay
about
still, and
that?
they move with amazing speed. Now, they have a little bit better eyesight than some, but a lot of orb-weaving spiders just respond to motion. In fact, on the tarantulas, they're known for the hair. The hair-like things on their legs are very sensitive to sound and vibration. Wow. But another myth about spiders is basically they are arachnid vampires. they got their fangs, they go and they just bite something, they suck the juice out of it and go on to the next. And actually that's not true, but it makes them even more terrifying sounding. Yeah. The truth is that all spiders, to some extent, digest at least part of what they eat. Anyhow, if you can see this on your own, if you go out to the garden, you look at throw something into like a garden spider or something, and watch it eat. It will use the fangs first to penetrate and kill the prey. They may wrap it in a little bit webbing while they're waiting for it to die. Okay. But then they will go, and I think we've got to see if we can get him around where he can be seen by the camera. This is actually a brown recluse, and unfortunately he's decided to crawl down on the bottom. Wow, but if you look in there, you can see he's actually got a wolf spider in his palps. What he's done after he knew he killed the wolf spider, he grabbed it, and they actually regurgitate digestive fluids onto the outside, and they take their palps and their jaws, and they macerate it. They get the digestive juices in it, and they eat it that way. Now, things like the wolf spiders and tarantulas, the hunters, a lot of them will tear the prey apart and eat bits and pieces, although you will see wings and legs and the less, I hate to say less juicy parts, but but the parts that they can't chew as well. The crab spiders have another way of going about it. They have exceedingly strong fangs, and their fangs pierce the shell of an insect with the exoskeleton, the external covering. They will go, not only inject some venom, but also they will throw up some digestive juices inside it. And so after it's dead, and it'll start digesting from the inside out, and they'll suck out the digestive, partially digestive stuff out of the inside. But anyhow, so that's how they eat, but what do they eat? They primarily eat bugs, and garden pests are among their favorite foods. There are some of the hunters will be specialists as far as diet, but almost any web-weaving spider will eat whatever goes into its web. The webs don't hurt the plant, so you want to attract them. You'll need to some tall plants for them to put their webs on. Also provide some mulching cover for these hunting insects to provide cover and go out and hunt and do their thing.
Andy, that was great. We appreciate that.
When we talk about butterfly gardens, we're really talking about more than just butterflies. There's a lot of pollinator insects, bees, flies, little beetles that really love these plants. They come to the plants for nectar, which is a carbohydrate source, and they also come for the pollen, which is a source of protein. Now, lady beetles will come when they can't find aphids, they'll feed on protein to get them by. Anything in the carrot family, like this parsley here, they have flat umbel-like flowers, and they have little tiny blossoms that the little parasitoid bees and the hoverflies can feed on. So you look here, you'll see just could be dozens of little tiny insects. The parasitoid wasp are important because it gives them energy, that nectar, then they can go lay their eggs on caterpillars and do some biological control. The key to having a garden that's good for the bugs is have things blooming from early spring throughout the summer and into the fall, like asters in the fall. You want things that are going to attract all kinds of insects, and many of them are going to be beneficial or pollinators.
All right, we talked about the spiders. Now, Mr. D, moles, voles, and chipmunks. So let's start with the moles first.
Let's just start with the moles. Okay. That's actually a success story. I can tell you some good things about the moles. This past week, I caught 3 in my yard, and that's probably about 7 that I've caught this year, using the same scissors type mole trap I've had for several years.
Okay.
But it's pretty easy to catch moles if you simply try to set your trap over a long tunnel that doesn't have any branches off to the side. And you set your trap over that tunnel and you should catch one. If you don't catch one within 2 days, move it. Don't leave it there for a week. Give it a couple of days to do that.
And with that being said, here's actually a video of you showing us how to set up the mole trap.
Looks like we have a little bit of a mole problem here. WKNO has its own mole. That's good. We'll see if we can take care of it. Need to understand a little bit about moles before you try to trap them, a little bit about their biology and their feeding habits. Primary diet of a mole is an earthworm, and they do eat white grubs and other soil insects, but earthworms are their primary diet. They have, one mole can tunnel up to 225 feet in one night. They have a voracious appetite. They're carnivorous, and they have different types of tunnels. The long tunnel that doesn't have any lateral tunnels off to the side is probably a transportation tunnel. Of course, he could be feeding, and he probably is feeding as he's going down through that transportation tunnel. The tunnels that have a lot of lateral tunnels off to the side, it looks like he's kind of confused or wandering around. Well, that is a feeding tunnel. He's probably in an area where there are a lot of earthworms, and he just is, that's the buffet. He's enjoying the food. Now, the place to set a trap is not in one of the feeding tunnels because he may not come back to this area for a long time. The place to set a trap is over a transportation tunnel, a tunnel that he uses going from his den to the feeding area, to the feeding ground. And what I look for, if I can't, ideally I would come out here every night for 2 or 3 nights and mash all these tunnels down, and then the next morning go out and look at the tunnel that was raised, flag it, and do that for 2 or 3 days, and then the tunnel that's raised every night tells me that is definitely a transportation tunnel, and you'll probably be 100% effective in catching a mole. I don't have time to do that, so I look for a long tunnel like this right here. We got 4 feet of this tunnel that doesn't have any side branches off, so that tells me that may very well be a transportation tunnel, and that's where I set my trap. If I'm successful in a day or 2, good. If not, I probably judged this incorrectly and I'll move my trap somewhere else. I don't ever leave a trap, an unsprung trap, in over a couple of days in an area. But it's important that you set the trap correctly. This has a couple of scissors on it. The way it's designed, when you set the trap, it actually opens a channel for these scissors to work. You be sure you set the scissors so that they will open up perpendicular to the runway. If you set it that way, that's the wrong way. The mole can still get through. So you push this down into the tunnel, snug it down there pretty good. It's really very, very simple. And you carefully put your foot on it and you push it down. As you're pushing it down, those scissors are opening, and I'm making sure that the trigger stays pretty much in the center, over the center of that tunnel. Push it down until it clicks and it's set. So we're ready. We are in the hunting mode right now. Those scissors have opened up and they're ready to go. And when the mole will, even though that's pushed down, the mole will raise that tunnel again, and when it raises that trigger, you'll have your mole, and it won't last very long. Just as important as learning how to set a trap correctly is learning how to spring that trap without getting your fingers cut off. So be very, very careful with that. And the way I do it, and I'm not sure this is an approved method, I know where those scissors are, so I make sure I keep my fingers away from that trigger. Now pull it out of the ground. Either side will work. Work it out of the ground. Okay, see the triggers is still, you can see the scissors. That's in mole catching mode. Usually it hits the ground before it does that, but I keep my fingers away from the scissors and just toss it on the ground, and it's ready to go.
Okay, and we have Andy here, and guess what he brought us so we can see, because most folks
have never seen a mole
never
or
seen
vole.
moles. So,
well, this is actually an eastern mole. You can see it's got long snouts, pretty sensitive, large. The front paws are designed for moving through the dirt easily. The fur goes in one direction. It's super soft, and I mean it actually feels good. You have some glide through the tunnels. Okay. They're ubiquitous in the South. They eat insects. Well, sure. They eat a lot of grubs, but I think their favorite food may be earthworms.
Right.
And so the best way to attract them to your yard is to have a beautiful stand of grass.
Exactly.
You don't use many pesticides. That just brings them in like sending the bat signal up.
Yeah. Okay, now what else did you bring us, Andy?
Well, I also brought two things. This is actually a shrew.
Okay.
As you can tell, the shrew looks like the mole. It eats insects as well, but it doesn't tend to dig as much as the moles do. They'll dig occasionally, but they primarily use the tunnels that are made by the moles, and they'll also follow some of the tracks made by voles with a V.
Okay.
That actually will eat your plants. They're easily mistaken, but if you look carefully, you can tell very quickly that they have very different front legs. These are not designed for burrowing. They do have the same sort of snout, but they're substantially smaller.
Okay.
A vole, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is also a rodent. It tends to be a little lighter brown, and it's sort of roughly halfway in size between the size of a shrew and a mole.
Last but not least, our chipmunk.
Oh, the chipmunk. Another garden animal. Both the chipmunks and the moles dig, and they tend to be solitary except when they're breeding. The moles will breed once a year, typically in the spring. The chipmunks, sometimes they have 2 batches. They look cute on cartoons and all that sort of stuff, but they do dig up your garden. They're omnivorous, but they will preferentially eat a lot of vegetables and stuff, and they can carry food in their cheeks. They have pouches a great way. Moles have really high energy demands. They run around the yard eating all the time, and they don't store food. They just kind of go to deeper areas to look for food when the weather gets colder.
All right, we appreciate that, Andy. Now, Mr. D, how about control?
Well, another thing you were talking about, the energy needs of the mole. They can eat 70 to 100% of their body weight per day
that's a lot.
of insects. And like you said, mostly earthworms is what they like. They have a real narrow, you notice their rear hindquarters are more narrow than the front, and that enables them to very easily turn around in their tunnel that they just dug. But they're interesting critters. You ever heard of making a mountain out of a molehill?
Yeah.
You know what a molehill is? Well, that's the hole that they dig during dry weather conditions, and they're still tunneling underground, but you can't see the tunnel, and the dirt has to go somewhere. Okay. But,
let's make sure we get that control while we have just a little time left.
Well, the control, just set a trap. Scissors type trap is the one that I found to be successful, and set it correctly over a long span of uninterrupted tunnel. If it's got a lot of side tunnels off to the side of it, it's a feeding tunnel, and the mole may not be there. Set the trap, and if you don't catch anything in 2 days, move it to another one, and just kind of keep doing that, and you will eventually have success.
Okay, now what about for the voles and the chipmunks?
Voles and chipmunks, voles are, both of them are rodents, of course. Voles, you can use rodenticides. They're cleared for use on voles. I have some vole damage under one of my apple trees, I noticed. So I was pulling some of the weeds back and leaves back from my apple trees. And that's one thing that will help prevent that damage or stop that damage, because they like to be covered up and they like weeds to be there. And I pull all that out. I'm going to try that. And if I still continue to have moles or voles present there, then I will put a rodenticide out to try to take care of it. The chipmunks, even though they're a rodent, none of the rodenticides are cleared for use on chipmunks. Exclusion methods, try to chase them out. There's not a whole lot to do. And they can do you some damage.
I've seen it.
They take my 4-wheel drive out of my hunting vehicle every year, and I have to take it to my mechanic to get it fixed every year before hunting season starts. If you got a vehicle that just sits out and you don't drive it a lot during the summertime, look out.
All right, well, we appreciate that, Andy, Mr. D.
We're here in the garden, and we've noticed that there's holes in the leaves on our okra. And that's from Japanese beetles. We're going to try to get rid of the Japanese beetles by mixing up some soap water. What happens here is you put a little soap, dishwashing soap, in some water, and you mix it up just a little bit, for a soapy solution. And then you get your Japanese beetles and you drop them in here, and this will eliminate the hormone that's present from them so that other Japanese beetles will not want to be attracted to this area. So you just take your soap, then you're going to find your beetles, pick them off, and drop them in the soap. And this will take care of them by picking them off and putting them in this solution.
Now is our Q&A session. Andy, we want you to join us.
Sure.
All right. Here's the first viewer email. How do I protect my strawberries from birds? I put stakes with bird netting over my patch. It was not working well, so I put taller stakes with another layer of netting. I've had silver tape tied on and added more. Still, they are eating through the net. Help, says Miss Elizabeth. Mr. D, help.
What kind of birds do you have? I'd like to see, if you do a good job of putting netting around and seal it real good, and I don't understand how the birds are getting through there unless you have the net so close to the fruit that the birds are able to pick through the netting. I really don't understand it, and that's the only thing I can think of. I would try frightening agents, try an artificial mole, an artificial snake that looks.
But they become habituated, so you've got to move that around.
Move it around. That's right.
But I'm with you. If you're having mechanical trolls like that, they're not working, I would re-examine my technique.
Right. You need some engineering. You may just need somebody with some engineering experience to try to improve that mechanical exclusion method.
All right, there you have it, Miss Elizabeth. Here's our next question. While pulling up weeds in my yard, I discovered several grub worms. What do you recommend I use to get rid of them?
A mole.
How about that? For that. We were waiting for that one. I saw Andy's. I saw it on your face.
Clearly, she has environmentally sustainable gardening techniques.
Actually, there are several I pulled from the Red Book, 2015, the page that gives the control methods. And one of the first thing on the list is something we've been using for years and years and years and years to control grub worms, and that's carbaryl. Garden Tech granules, 2% granules will do a good job. They're easy to kill. They come out at night. If you scatter the pesticide out on the lawn at late afternoon, you'll actually see the dead grubs on the surface of the ground. But there are other Grub X, the Maxide is a product, Bayer Advanced 24-hour grub killer. Those are the ones that are listed to control both the larvae of the green June beetles and the larvae of the May beetles, Schaefer's Japanese beetle. I can't tell them apart. The white grubs are all the larvae of all of these different scarab beetles.
Yeah, well, two things thrown in there. The grubs are actually larva beetles. They'll produce something later that some of which can be beneficial. I'd also, before you apply pesticides, so I'd see if they're doing any harm.
That's good.
Are you concerned that they're there, or you're concerned that you're seeing a decline in your vegetables or your garden?
That's a good point.
And it could be attributable to the.
That's a good point.
They're probably in everybody's yard if they've got any organic matter at all. And honestly, I can only think of a couple of times in my career where I've seen enough damage that I would recommend treating. I saw it in a farmer's pasture one time, and they were completely killing his Bermuda grass. But most of the time you can live with the damage that they create.
Okay. All right. So here's our next question. Are ants harmful in a vegetable garden? As he takes off his glasses here.
There's a couple of schools of thought. Earlier we were looking at some aphids on some tomatoes, and ants like aphids. Aphids secrete honeydew. It's kind of a sweet, sticky substance, and ants will actually kind of protect those aphids. And ants are omnivorous, which means they can be carnivorous, but they're omnivorous. They eat both plant material and other insects. So if they're eating an insect, they're beneficial, and you're probably okay to leave them there. If they're feeding on plant material like okra, tomatoes, fire ants are probably maybe an example that can be beneficial, but if there's so many out there that they're bothering you when you're picking peas, then they're not beneficial. So there are some products that you can use, some of the baits, and that, you know, if they're bothering you and you want to get rid of them, yes, you can kill them, and they are products that are labeled for use in home gardens. But I would wait and, you know, try to determine whether or not they're doing you more harm than good. You know, they may be doing you more good than harm, and if that's the case, leave them be.
Let's leave them be. All right, here's our next question, which is a good one. Does the soil lab you often speak of test for lead? Mr. D?
No.
It does not.
Absolutely not. The UT Soil Test Lab checks for nutrients that plants need. And if you want to have an analysis done for lead, you'll need to go with one of the private labs around, like A&L Lab in Memphis, and that's the one that's local that I'm aware of. Yeah. But there are other labs around that will specifically test for what you ask them to test for. It'll be more than $4 a sample. I would guess.
Yeah, typically lead, they use techniques that have really low detection limits, because you're interested in lower levels of lead than you would be nutrients. And so there's a lot of higher costs that go into that, not only the equipment, but also to prevent cross-contamination, because lead's so ubiquitous.
Yeah.
I know a few years ago we did some gardens in the urban areas, and we checked the soil, and it was kind of surprising that most of the pHs of the soil was high, but it was because there's so much white gravel around, and you know, the limestone had raised the pH. But there was other analysis done in almost all of them, because they were in old houses around. Almost all of them had, you know, fairly high levels of lead. Or I say high levels of lead. Just the presence of the paint, the lead paint.
It's not endogenous.
You know, it's parts per million, and, you know, parts per billion, and, you know, very low level.
All right, Andy, Mr. D, we're out of time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Remember, we love to hear from you. Send us an email or letter. The email address is questions@familyplotgarden.com. And the mailing address is Family Plot, 7151 Cherry Farms Road, Cordova, Tennessee, 38016. Or you can go online to familyplotgarden.com. That's all we have time for today. Thanks for watching. I'm Chris Cooper. Be sure to join us next time for the Family Plot, Gardening in the Mid-South. Be safe.